Hey, Celina, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. Nice to see you.
Yes, it is great to connect with you. Where are you calling in from?
I'm based right here in Washington, D.C. So where it's all happening right now.
Oh my gosh. Yes, there's a lot of action happening right there.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Wow. Well, I am so glad that we were able to get some of your time today to talk about, what you've worked on, what you're currently working on. Heart disease is something that I very often put as a defining point for femtech, because people are always asking me, how do you define femtech? And I say solely affect women, like periods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Differently affect women, or disproportionately in heart disease. I always put in those categories, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm really excited to have you on, is what I'm
That's so
getting.
great. Yeah.
Before we get into the heart stuff, tell us about you. Our listeners love to hear where our guests are from. What did you study? What career did you have before this? And how did you end up here?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. I'm really honored by having this conversation. So my journey started in the Philippines. I was born in the Philippines, and then with my family, we moved to LA when I was 6, and just got really enamored with health and studied epidemiology, and then it started actually in my career in sexual health education. And at the time, it was around the HIV, early days of the HIV epidemic.
And for our listeners, because we even have
Yeah,
listeners that listen, we have all these different types of people that listen. Epidemiology is the study of disease, right? Is that true?
that's right. Exactly. Disease and disease trends over time.
Got it.
Study of epidemics, really. That's sort of the associated word.
Yep. So
Um,
sexual wellness, and then HIV. Now I'm
yeah, exactly. And the other kind of half of my career has been in corporate responsibility. So I've sort of interwoven global health, sexual health, corporate responsibility. And I spent some time in Africa working for the UN. And just before moving here to DC, I was living in London for 8 years, running a global alliance for chronic diseases. So I've had my share of travels and experiences, and
worldly woman.
now I'm at WomenHeart, and it's been a really great next step for me. So I'm happy to be
Celina,
here.
any chance you have any contacts in Antarctica? Because it's the only continent we don't have listeners in yet, and I am just determined to have listeners on every continent.
I bet we can wrangle up someone.
Okay.
Well, let's work on that, Brittany. Let's work on that.
I actually just saw, I don't know if you're on Clubhouse yet. I just got on this week, and there's an event coming up this weekend that's like women in STEM in Antarctica. And I was like, I'm attending that.
Oh my gosh, there it is. Yeah. I can't believe there's more than like 2 people in that group, but that's awesome if there is.
So tell us about WomenHeart. What is that?
So WomenHeart is an organization that was founded, 22 years ago now, by 3 women who were actually really angry with their experience of having been misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
And that really is the story of not just heart disease, but women's health in general.
Oh yeah.
This idea of misdiagnosis, delayed diagnosis, not being believed, being told it's nothing, that I think is an important summary to why there needs to be something called WomenHeart, or why there needs to be a specialized field of femtech. It's because of that. And so WomenHeart has, for the last 21 years, has focused on the intersection of women's health and heart disease, and has really grown up to be an organization determined to make sure that no woman travels her heart journey alone. That's sort of really the all-encompassing idea that's been the driving force behind WomenHeart.
Wow. I already have so many questions. I have so many questions. So let's, can you give us, why would a woman need somebody's help through this journey?
Yeah.
when we say heart disease, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
talking fundamentals of, how is this even different from men's hearts, women's hearts, all that.
Yeah. No,
We can
it's
pick where we want to start because
well, let me start with us as an organization, and then we can back into a couple of the points that you just brought up. So the how of it, the how we do our work is every year we train up a group of women who themselves have begun their heart journey. And so they are either dealing with heart failure themselves, or they've got an elevated blood pressure, or they've had a heart attack and survived. They could, or they may have congestive heart failure. They could have any one of those, or even more, different diagnoses. They come to WomenHeart, and I'll tell you the number one reason they do it, and they tell me this, is I want to make sure that no woman goes through what I've been through.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we do with them is we, pre-COVID, we would send them to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and they would get a full training on the ins and outs of heart disease, their own heart disease, but also just the more the broader topic of heart disease. And they get to do really great things like pick up and touch and feel the medical devices that might be implanted in their heart.
Wow.
They get to talk to cardiologists who obviously work in this field. But I think the biggest prize, or the biggest value of that training, is that they get to talk to each other. And then they get to see that what may have felt like a very lonely experience for them back home is actually a shared experience. And so that it really drives them to then go back home to make sure that other women are not going through that alone.
That's right.
And so that's sort of the how of it. And I think, the why of it is, as you mentioned, there is a difference between the way men experience heart disease and the way women experience heart disease. And because the majority of research on heart disease has been done on men, and on particular middle-aged white men, that's what we have come to know as sort of conventional wisdom about, let's say, heart attack symptoms are based on the experience of middle-aged white men.
Wow.
But women's heart attack symptoms are different. So as a concept
for a man,
sure, yeah. So I mean, the what we tend to hear, the classic symptoms we might see in movies or in television, are somebody has chest pain, they have shooting pain down the left side. Yeah, it's sort of this, and then they're stumbling around, and then they might become unconscious. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm not saying that never happens, but the prevailing symptoms for women are things like, maybe one day not being able to walk up the same flight of stairs that they were able to walk up yesterday. It's like a severe level of fatigue that is just not normal. But the problem with that, as you can imagine, is that sometimes we're just tired. Sometimes life just tires us out. So of course we're not going to think, oh, I just had a heart attack.
Yeah, and women are not necessarily supported in complaining about how tired they are.
Correctly. Exactly right. No, exactly. Yeah. And so we ourselves only reinforce that, right? Because we tell ourselves, oh, I can't deal with that right now. I don't have time to deal with that right now. Yeah. I mean, I cannot tell you how many stories I've had from our champions, the women who we train, who say, the only reason I went is because my husband said, oh, you should really go get that checked out. Yeah. It's somebody else having to tell us, because women tend to, again, put themselves last compared to, taking care of their husbands or their children or other people around them. And so I think, so sometimes we have to get out of our own way in order to put ourselves sort of front and center. Yeah. And I think the bias against women being believed in heart disease in particular is that misunderstanding about what conventional heart attack symptoms look like runs deep into the healthcare system as well.
So doctors don't even know that extreme fatigue is a symptom of a heart attack.
It is because it's sort of a generalized symptom. they could investigate a whole host of other conditions.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going to automatically go, oh, that's a heart attack.
Yeah.
We need to look at that and investigate that.
Wow. So, if I think about heart disease in like 3 stages, it's the like, prevention, and then the actual disease happening, and then the treatment for it. So we're talking right now, we're kind of talking about specifically heart attacks, like when it's happening. The symptoms for men and women are different.
Yeah.
We don't know that.
Yeah.
Symptoms for women are usually the same symptoms that we say we don't deserve to even complain about.
Correct.
So, like,
exactly right.
What are other well, actually, let's just stick with heart attack, because I heart disease being very similar to cancer, where it's like, well, pancreatic versus breast versus all different. So correct. All right. So let's look at the heart attack storyline. So we talked about the symptoms being different.
Yeah.
I heard that, to prevent heart attacks or heart disease, you should take baby aspirin every day. And then I heard that study was done on only men. So can we talk about the prevention? Is that true?
Sure. Yeah. So I think what's really important to note about prevention is sort of what are the precursors, right? So what are the risk factors? And really, from a clinical standpoint, the number one risk factor is high blood pressure. Okay. Right. So that is a way for us. That's a really important way for us to be able to gauge how likely it is that we're going to develop heart disease. And that's true for men and women. That's not different. But the challenge is that what brings us there, what gets us to sort of having elevated blood pressure is stress. Okay. So that, and again, it goes back to what you were saying, like we as women are conditioned to not complain about the load that we're carrying. So that manifests itself in a physical way, even though, one of probably the most important ways you can prevent heart disease by lowering your blood pressure is to manage stress, which means, importantly, and I've heard many women with heart disease or, surviving heart attacks have told me, your number one most important tool in preventing heart disease is the word no. And that's a really, really difficult thing for us as women. But I want to get to the heart of that, because I think we can talk about a lot of other things like lower your salt intake. We can talk about exercise. We can talk about, that kind of, but I want us to really delve deeply into the psychology of this, because for me, that's why WomenHeart is so effective. And that's where I think we get our best bang for our buck in terms of talking about lifelong prevention strategies.
Yep. Because what I hear you saying is that societal gender expectations are literally killing us.
Yes.
Is like,
yes.
If we cut to the conclusion.
Correct. Correct. That's the headline, right? Like that's like above the fold headline. That's it.
Wow. And so, happening. And when we are talking about stress, I can think of, I know there's the statistics about women are the majority caregivers, not only for children, but of their own parents.
Yeah.
And so that's stressful. You're taking care of 2 sets of children, depending on how your parents are doing. Right. But what other forms of stress are these women saying, if I say no to this, I'm, improving my heart health? What other kinds of stresses are we talking about?
Well, I mean, so there is the caregiving, but there's also just the oftentimes you are working in your day job, and then you have to come home and you're working at home, right? We have the burden of, cleaning and cooking and doing sort of the let's just call them traditional roles that women have to take on. I don't want to say that that's not changing, because it is changing. So it's definitely something that's improved over time. But I think, I'm talking to women now. I think we do it to ourselves too. I mean, yes, there's societal expectations, but we also, have these different mantras like, we can do it all, and, all of that stuff. And there's sort of this premium or this aspiration, right, of being a superwoman,
Yeah.
rather than a woman who knows her body intimately and understands what allows it to thrive, and understands what is pushing it over, over some limits.
Are there symptoms of high blood pressure that a woman could feel but is maybe not recognizing? Or how does
The,
a woman know?
the number one symptom of high blood pressure is no symptoms, and that's the problem.
Oh gosh.
That's the problem.
Okay.
We, more often than not, you could have an elevated blood pressure and not know you have it. So it's really one of those things where, and this is what I encourage any woman to do, or any family, any household to have at home, is a blood pressure cuff.
Okay.
And that, in the same way that, you might exercise 3 times a week, I would say, you should be checking your blood pressure once a week. And know, not only is that good for you to understand sort of what your blood pressure is, but to know what's normal for you, because that might look different. We've got sort of the standard idea for what blood pressure is normal. But that's going to look different from person to person. So the only way you're going to know what your normal is to do that over time.
Any chance that the standardize what normal blood pressure is based on a white man?
It is. It's interesting that you say that, because over the last sort of 5 years, the definition of what normal is, even what elevated is, and then what they call pre-hypertensive and then hypertensive, those have shifted down. So what we thought was elevated is now what we call elevated was not considered elevated before. So yeah, that those are shifting over time, and I'm gonna venture to say that it's because we are getting better data from a more diverse set of subjects in studies, in clinical trials.
Yeah, definitely. What's the prevalence of high blood pressure in women?
That's a really good question. So what we tend to say is that there are 48 million women in the US that are at risk for heart disease. So in other words, there are 48 million women who have basically suffer from hypertension. Wow. And that's diagnosed.
Yeah.
Okay, diagnosed. So there's going to be many, many more who are going to suffer from it, or are pre-hypertensive, or are on their way to having hypertension. And I use those terms interchangeably: high blood pressure and hypertension. They are the same thing.
And is there awareness about this? Like, are we talking about it enough? Are we talking about it enough in the right way for women? Because like you were saying, the woman's heart attack symptoms are different. So how are we getting that word out? Is anybody doing that?
Well, it's a really great question. And, just to say, because I realize I haven't said this yet, heart disease is the #1 killer of women.
Oh,
not just in this country, but around the world. It's the #1 killer of people. So it's also the #1 killer of men. And despite, the increase in awareness over the last several decades, we still only see about a little bit over half, about 56% of women who even recognize heart disease to be the #1 killer. This is what I call the effect of the success of the breast cancer kind of community. Because every time you ask somebody what they think the #1 killer is, I tend to get the answer that it's breast cancer. And so so the prevalence of breast, it's an interesting flip. So breast cancer kills about 1 in 30 women.
Okay.
And yet, compared to heart disease, and yet the amount of research dollars that goes into breast cancer is 30 times higher than what goes into women's heart disease. Right. So it's a real big, they have just done a supremely incredible job in terms of marketing and campaigning, getting the pink ribbon out, just an incredible job. And so, and that has a lot to do with the fact that it's sex specific, and that obviously it's going to be something that happens in women a lot more than in men.
Wow. Okay. So are women, the #1 killer of women is heart disease.
Yeah.
Part of that contribution of death, mortality, because of a like misdiagnosis or lack of treatment options. So do you think it could
Yeah.
maybe be number two if we actually had women specific heart health care, or what do you think about that?
So I don't want to get this wrong. So I'm gonna I did a little bit of research just to make sure, and I'm gonna quote this from a study that I was reading about, and it says a main cause of heart attack misdiagnosis is the fact that male heart attacks are seen as the standard. So that tells you everything you need to know right there.
Yeah.
And so because our benchmarks are that we then use to generalize to the population,
Mm-hmm.
right, have really been garnered from research done on men.
Mm-hmm.
We are being misled into thinking that heart disease looks one way, when in fact it looks, a multitude of ways depending on who you have in front of you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, only because I'm the host of the show did I know the symptoms are different. That is the only
that
because somebody on the show told me one time.
It is maddening too. I mean, one of the most terrifying stories I heard was this woman who had given birth to her baby, and she was in the hospital, and in the middle of her kind of recovery, she was having a heart attack. And not just a heart attack, but she was having a SCAD, which is an arterial dissection, which means basically like it's like a huge, basically her artery was tearing.
Oh
so
my
it's massive.
God.
So she's having this heart attack in the hospital, and they sent her home because they said you're just having a panic attack. That to me, that is instructive. That tells you so much about what is happening in the context of our medical system, that they mistook a massive heart attack for a panic attack.
Hysteria.
Yeah. And that, again, the history of women in healthcare, right? It sort of plays into this as well, in terms of what is believed and what is not believed, and what is assumed just to be in your, quote unquote, in your head. It's a powerful lens to see a lot of this.
So, and my listeners, my mouth has been open for the last 30 seconds. If there was any bugs in my room right now, like I am just so shocked. It's like it's insane, and I think it's particularly flavorful that you mentioned it's a woman who had just given birth, because women who have just given birth, like the doctors are like, yeah, I had to sew up your vagina, but like whatever, that's normal. And it's like, you deserve so much more than that. Like they get home and their breasts are clogged, and it's so painful, and they have this new baby and they're bleeding.
That's
and
right.
The doctors are like, well, that's what it is. That's birth.
That's right. Suck it up. Yeah. Well, and as an aside, I don't want to get too far off track, but as an aside, I think what's also really important is that, heart disease is something that a lot of doctors who are not cardiologists push to the side. And let me tell you what I mean by that. A lot of heart disease is precipitated by pregnancy. So preeclampsia is the condition of elevated blood pressure as a direct result of being pregnant.
Got it.
But because your obstetrician is focused on you having a healthy baby, they may treat your preeclampsia, but they're just like, let's get this baby, let's get this task done, right? Let's get you to deliver a healthy baby. And oftentimes the women are left with hypertension that they have to deal with for the rest of their life that was precipitated in pregnancy.
And it could have been prevented if someone had treated during.
Exactly. If there was a lot more done to treat it in the moment, then the longer the tail of hypertension post delivery could have been mitigated. I mean, another great example of this is cancer treatment. Mm-hmm. There has been a lot of it's an increasing body of work and a new body of work called cardio-oncology. and that is cardiovascular conditions that result from chemotherapy and other cancer treatments. And so, of course, you could sort of understand that to say, well, of course, the oncologist is just there to make sure they get rid of the cancer. Yeah. It's almost like they don't care what happens after, because they're just wanting to keep you alive. Mm-hmm. And so that, that drive, and the fact that, to me, it's a reflection of how chopped up and siloed our healthcare system is, that it's almost like the cardiologist will deal with that later. I just need to make sure I get rid of this cancer. So that to me is also another driver. The way our healthcare system is set up is another driver for why there is such high levels of heart disease in our country.
I mean, I could say so many things about, we talk a lot at Femtech Focus about, we have cures for certain things, but then there are 10 side effects that change your life forever. And everyone says, but aren't you happy you're alive? And it's like, there comes a point where no, I'm not. Like, this is a daily reprieve that I have to take care of now. Right.
That's right.
What about differences in heart disease amongst women of different races? Is there different rates?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we certainly see elevated levels of heart disease and hypertension and prehypertension in communities of color, and in particular in African-American communities. Okay. Now, because it's not just genetic, although there is a genetic component, because it's not just lifestyle, although there is that, because stress, as I mentioned, is such a driver, then of course, if you have an overabundance of burdens on you on a day-to-day basis, and as is true for a lot of communities of color, that is going to precipitate, right, the higher levels of heart disease in a community.
Yeah.
And so I'm very sensitive to not saying, well, that's genetic.
Yeah.
Just sort of chalking it up to genetics, because it's also about what burdens do we carry, and not just what burdens do we carry, but what burdens have our ancestors carried throughout time. So yeah, it's a really important facet of the way we look at disparities.
Before we started the interview, you and I were talking about what are some of the good things that happened because of COVID.
Yeah.
I think a door that was finally cracked open to people outside of epidemiology, outside of public health. I have a minor in public health.
Okay.
My friend's an epidemiologist. I love this stuff, right? Microbes are the coolest things ever. I love bacteria. But COVID, I think, cracked open a door to let other people in to see, oh my God, wait a minute. More Black Americans are dying from COVID than white ones, but it's the same virus. How is that even possible? The scientists and the doctors have been trying to tell everyone it's not just because they're Black that they have heart disease or this or that. It's like because their access to healthcare, their living conditions, the way they live their lives, the jobs that they have, their exposure.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I'll tell you, something that's made me so angry is seeing a map of Washington, D.C. where I live. And we're broken down into wards in Washington, D.C. And there's a map of the prevalence of COVID, different wards. And it's predictable because it's the wards where the levels of poverty are higher. That's where more COVID is. But then you superimpose on that the wards where there's highest uptake of vaccine. And you better believe it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And that I cannot even begin to express how that makes me mad. What are we doing as a society here, right? Like this is just there is an injustice here. That's part of, and that's what to go back to WomenHeart, that's what WomenHeart is here about and for. I check in on a regular basis with Nancy Levin, who's one of the founders of the organization, and she reminds me, and I ask her to remind me every time I talk to her, that WomenHeart is fundamentally a feminist organization.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question of justice.
Yes.
This is not just, oh, this is, not like fun and games and, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a support group of women talking, about how they deal with heart disease. This is a justice question, and this is an injustice that the way our health care system is set up would lead to women not being believed. That, there is something about that it is flat out wrong. It's wrong.
Celina, we're going to be friends. There are some days that I'm like, I'm not sure I can get out of bed and do this, because it, for me, Femtech Focus, I've definitely structured our image and our company and our culture to not be angry, because I feel I couldn't go on if every day I made a company that was only angry. But the coals under our fire are anger.
That's right.
Because what Femtech Focus is, like, we're about awareness, and we're all like, oh, we're providing resources to the industry, but really our secret agenda is we're fighting for women's health equality.
Absolutely. And I want to take inspiration from Amanda Gorman, right? The young, beautiful young poet from the other day at the inauguration. What I loved, what crystallized for me when we were listening to her, is that you could feel the embers and the coals under her. Wow. You could feel, and yet she so masterfully channeled it. She's got that gift, right, of knowing what to do with that energy.
Yes.
And using it for good, and using it to inspire others. To say, keep going, keep going. This is not all for naught.
Yes.
Right. That there is something that we, not only is it worth fighting for, but we can do this. We can do this.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I wanted to ask you about, in terms of that, the prevention, it happening, the treatment part of it. So another thing I heard, tell me if I'm right or wrong, but that most like heart disease drugs are still only usually tested on men, even though women obviously have lots of heart disease.
Yeah.
So can we talk about
absolutely. Yeah. It's not just, so the short answer is yes. And one of the things that we have been doing, one of the priorities for us ever since, is to make sure there are more women, and in particular women of color, in clinical trials.
Yes.
And the hub of that, the nut of that we have to crack, and this is, I think, especially true in communities of color, is this idea that there's this inherent mistrust in the research.
Right.
Institution, machinery, right? Yeah. And so I think it's not enough for us to say we want more representation. I think we have to even question the way research is being conducted.
Yeah.
And so you're right about that. And it gets absurd to the point where, I'll give you a really concrete example. A medical device company that makes things that you have to like insert into your heart, right? So you can't even see these things with a naked eye. You have to use a magnifying glass. They realize that they can't use this certain medical device they made because it's too big for women's hearts. And they decided that there was no market. Are you getting as angry as I? There is no market to make a slightly smaller device. So this is not just about getting more women into research. This is all about also understanding, or the strange, to me, bias that is still perpetuated in places where these important decisions are being made, right? And so that is, when I heard that, I was thinking to myself, we have, this is 2021, and yet we still have so far to go.
I'm okay. Now I'm cycling through all of my emotions of grief. Now I'm at, and it's astonishing to me, that they got that far in the process, that they got to human hearts.
Indeed.
By the way, anyone listening, if you don't know the process of creating a med device, actually being put in a human heart and figuring out what sizes is years into it, millions of dollars.
That's right.
And they got all the way to that part, and they had never asked themselves or tried to put it into a female modeled heart. Okay. So so that's the first thing I think about.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is that women's hearts are niche, right? It's this idea that femtech founders continuously bump into, that we are trying to shift, the paradigm on, but women and vaginas and uteruses and sexual, none of these are niche. We all
right
1%. Actually, if we're talking about the Senate and voting, we actually have a little bit more. We're 51%. Don't call us niche, right?
Exactly. And somehow I think we romanticize this idea that women are mysteries. So there's all of these sort of, I think, historical ideas out there floating around, that women are hysterical, right? Like that history, but also that like women are mysteries, and that's sort of a nice thing, right? Like somehow we don't mind that it's a mystery as a society. I'm not talking about an individual, but as a society, we think, oh, women are mysteries. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that not everyone, teenagers and mostly teenagers and adolescents will draw penises around, doodle out on their desk or whatever. But no one ever draws vulvas. It's mysterious.
Mysterious. Yeah.
No one even knows how do you doodle that, right?
And to the point where, unfortunately, what that means is it's mysterious for the girl. It's herself.
Yeah, that's right. And oh my God, my labias do this or that. It must be weird.
Yeah,
that's not what it looks like on the porn sites.
Exactly.
I was thinking of actually consulted a founder. He's actually a very lovely human. He's just a really smart guy, wants to make impact. He had some heart troubles, so he wanted to make this like EKG, like on the go, device that you just kind of place on yourself. It's a really great stethoscope. I, again, love this guy. He's wonderful. He has great intentions. But as soon as he showed me the idea, I said, well, what are you going to do about women's breasts? Because it was all about specific placement. And he was like, well, I'm sure it can hear through. And I'm like, you can't just assume. Breasts are very different. They're made up of different stuff, depending. They're different sizes.
Exactly.
They're even different sizes within themselves. If your device requires specific placement based on the sternum, that ain't gonna work. Also,
absolutely
trying to target sudden heart attacks in teenagers during sports and stuff. He's like, every sports director should have this. And I said, as a person who lived a life as a 16-year-old girl, I would have not wanted my male sports director putting things on my chest every day, And so he was like, these are great points. I didn't consider it. And his daughter, he's like, he actually loves Femtech Focus. So if you're listening, Rick, you're wonderful. But it was like, there was a lot of education to be like, hey, how about this half of the world?
But I think that is so, that conversation that you have with them is so instructive, because I think that's how a lot of technology gets developed, or that's how a lot of products get developed.
Yep, that's right. Wow. Well, I could literally talk to you forever. So much more to talk about, but let's talk about one. I want to ask you about your future goals for women heart.
Yeah.
So what is your what's the overarching, for me, my goal for Femtech Focus is I put myself out of business. Femtech becomes health tech, right? It's probably going to take a long time. I'm probably going to be employed for a while now, right? What is Women's Heart ultimate goal?
Yeah. So our long-term goal is for women to have parity with men in terms of how their heart disease symptoms are being addressed in the healthcare system. But in the more sort of immediate term, what 2020 did for us was really put us on the fast track to a technological revolution in terms of how we deliver our support to women. And so we developed an app. And so, this year is really about, the further expansion of these technological platforms that we've developed in 2020. We want to make a much more concerted effort in many of the things we talked about today, but in particular around health disparities, to have WomenHearts community reflect women across the U.S., to have that population be mirrored in the community that we are serving. And then in the more medium to long term, we're going for global domination. No, but we do think that there is a need for what we do beyond the borders of the U.S.
Yes.
We just want to make sure that we get it right here, so that when we roll out to beyond these borders, we do it in a way that is sustainable and has a higher chance of success.
Absolutely. The investor in me is coming up a little bit. I wanted to ask you really quickly about, I heard somebody said the most wealthy person is going to be the one who makes a med device specifically for women's hearts, because the cardiac industry acquires at such large valuations and so often.
That's right.
So whoever makes a med device specifically for a woman's heart is going to be wildly successful and wildly rich. Is that
right? I was, if the question is where would I see innovation being necessary? Without a doubt, it is cardiovascular health in women, given that it's the number one killer. And, we get sort of distracted. Distracted is not the right word, but we certainly go to the places that make sense. Repro, right? I mean, that's where we go. And repro and weight loss, really, right?
Wow.
And so the majority of femtech investments are there right now, which really leaves this, the heart disease space wide open. I mean, I belong to some other startup investment groups, and they are having a really hard time attracting heart disease startups to even come to their events. Because we are so what's the word? We are so almost glommed around these other, again, I don't want to say easy ideas, but more ideas that are sort of right in front, around period management and menopause and fertility and things like that, when really heart disease is where it's at, I think.
Well, if WomenHeart does an event and needs a innovator sponsor or partner, count us in, because
that's
I'm always
awesome.
so bullish about it.
That's awesome.
We cannot have all these episodes about period.
Yeah.
I don't even have a period. I am on a birth control that lets me skip it. So the show wouldn't even be relevant, right? It's on my woman experience. But I sure as hell have a heart and a brain, bones that are differently. And I heard in a group the other day, somebody asked me about Alzheimer's. They said, Alzheimer's, twice as likely to get it as a woman. What femtech companies are addressing Alzheimer's? And I was like, damn, that's a good question. And I thought to myself, we don't have enough data yet on how Alzheimer's occurs in women versus men, for why do we have twice as much, and we just don't know enough about Alzheimer's in women for us to even innovate specifically for it. So my question to you there is, do we know enough about heart disease in women in order for us to even create innovations around it, or are we still at the R&D research side?
That is a really, really good question. And I guess it depends on where in the continuum of clinical intervention to addressing everyday behaviors you want to kind of stake your claim, right? Because if we're talking clinical intervention, then obviously that's all about clinical trials, and you'd have to invest heavily in getting that data, right? To even get to the place of having an idea.
Yes.
But if we're talking about sort of further downstream, we're talking about prevention, we're talking about lifestyle, we're talking about stress management, we're talking about getting women support to say no. That is much more in the realm of implementation research, which I would argue is the place that we're gonna see the greatest sort of boom, just in the research space in general.
Interesting.
So that's sort of how I would look at it, that there is innovation to be had, but it doesn't necessarily have to be clinical or treatment based.
and probably that Congress should pass more grants to fund women's heart research
Absolutely.
so that they can
Absolutely.
publish papers. And so innovators like myself and funders like myself can, actually make tools based on that data, right?
Yeah. But I think what you are doing is really important, and just like helping each other find one another, like understanding that there is a community out there.
That's right.
That's powerful, just to know again that you're not alone in these efforts.
Well, that kind of alludes to my last question. What do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
I do think that it goes to this idea of everyday behavioral analysis. I mean, the tools are getting so much better in terms of, being able to tell us on, minute by minute, second by second, what we are doing and how we're doing it and how we can do it better. I think the application of those tools to monitoring our heart health, I think joining those two up and thinking about, how that equals, better real-time accurate data that can then be presented to your cardiologist. To me, that might unlock better outcomes for women.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today, Celina. You are amazing. And again, we'll partner with you any day.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I really enjoyed it. And this is a great way to close out a Friday.